enough, we did a clinic at Ward 6 in Tucson with Councilmember Kazache. And we had a guy who came in, charged from 1972, ounce of marijuana, felony charge. He never affected his life until like 2016 or 17. He applied for a real estate license. Boom. That charge, which we couldn't find because it's well before digitization and records being online, we couldn't find it. So, but they found it when he applied. And there's the negative effect again, that one silly marijuana arrest in 1972 comes back and bites him almost 40 years later. That's how bad it can be. The effects on housing, the effects on getting jobs, that even these simple marijuana possession arrests can have on individuals is horrific. And it's why we want media at our expungement clinics to tell people stories who are willing to speak, so that general public can understand what the war on drugs has truly done to, in particular, marginalized individuals and people who have been disproportionately impacted. It really has been an incredibly damaging war. And that's why we're fighting. And that's why legalization is one step in this bigger pushback against the mentality that drugs are immoral and that drugs should be punished as a crime, not as a health issue. And so that's where we stand. But with expungements, that's going to be one of our goals. The other thing that came out of, which is not uncommon in states that legalize out of 207, was the fact that we carved out 26 social equity licenses. Now, I will be totally honest with you. There's probably no way in the world to create a social equity program that is designed to help those people who have been disproportionately impacted. There's no way to ever create one that's perfectly fair and equitable. Many states have tried. They all have drawbacks. Ours has drawbacks too. In fact, our social equity program, its application period starts December 1st through the 14th. It has been challenged by 2 lawsuits right now that says it does not accurately represent social equity. We humbly don't think that lawsuit's going anywhere, and we think that it will continue with the deadline and the application period. But I will tell you, having been at the state level as director of Arizona Normal, there is a lot of grift relative to social equity. And what the grift is, it's a game where people will get someone disproportionately impacted, and they will say, okay, we'll give you 51% ownership, but we're basically going to make some deal where as soon as if we win that license, we're going to flip you and we're going to flip the license back to us and buy out that person. Now, they justify that as, but we're helping someone who was disproportionately impacted. No, you're not. You're helping one person. You're not helping the community the person come from. You're not helping that person to create a business that can give back to a community, to hire people from the disproportionately impacted area where the person comes from. So there's all kinds of gaming that can happen. And for full transparency, we've had lucrative offers to Arizona Normal because we have led in expungement clinics with 51 to this date, and we have a list. Well, our list is people who meet one of the 4 criteria for social equity. That is that you have an expungible offense. People are desperate for our list because it saves them time knocking door to door and trying to find people who could be eligible. We've been offered $20,000 up front. We've been offered for the list. We've been offered, if someone off of our list gets a license, each person off of our list that gets a license, we would get $400,000 more. We'd be the richest normal chapter that ever exists in the world, but we'd be drummed out of normal, we'd be drummed out of the cannabis community in a heartbeat. And so we drew a red line in the sand that Arizona Normal is not sharing our list with anyone, and we will not be complicit in any way with the destruction of the social equity program. So that's our line in the sand, and we continue to do that. But we still have a lot of dispensaries that partner with us to help promote, because it's a good look for them in the community. Look at us. We're giving back. We're bringing people in to help with respect to expungements. And so that's a good thing. So that's why we supported Prop 207. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're probably thinking at this point, well, if you got medical legal and if you got adult use legal, why do you need both? What's the difference? Believe it or not, there are, I know this probably sounds off, but there are subtly big differences. And the first big difference is the possession amount. As a patient, I can possess up to 2.5 ounces. As an adult use consumer, I'm limited to 1 ounce. Furthermore, with 207, there are no job protections carved out into 207. So if you do consume and you have an employer who wants to drug test you, not a lot you can do about that as an adult use consumer. Now, there are protections for that with respect to the medical program. There are carve-outs that help to someone, if I'm a patient and they want to drug test me, I do have some protection relative to that. So we encourage people who consume regularly, one, because of cost to keep their card, but also if you are in any, now, if you're in any fear of your job coming back at you for drugs, et cetera, or for the use of marijuana, then stay a patient. You do have some protection. Lastly, there's a big difference in price. Prop 207, where there's no way you're going to legalize without actually having people or having money come into the state coffers. So obviously there had to be a tax attached to 207. And there is a 16% excise tax that is attached to it. Meaning, if you consume daily, you're going to spend way too much money on the adult use side. We encourage you to stay a patient, because you will save money in the long run as a patient. If you consume once a month, or friends come into town and you want to get a kick out of taking somebody to the dispensary and buy up some edibles and have a great night, just stay adult use. You're totally protected legally from buying that and consuming it as long as you consume responsibly. But if you do consume regularly, if you do have legitimate patient needs for the consumption, then we definitely say stay a patient. And lastly, there are edible limits, because one thing the adult use market doesn't want is, I don't know if all of you remember back when Colorado first went legal, New York Times columnist Maureen Dowd went to Denver and decided to buy a candy bar edible. Well, what she neglected to do was to just consume 10 milligrams of it to start. She ate the whole 100 milligram bar. Well, then she has 12 hours of living hell that she writes an op-ed about. Well, that doesn't do any of us who are in the advocacy of marijuana. That doesn't help our cause when you have someone, I just ate a 100-gram candy bar, oh my God. And it's true. Edibles can be a really bad experience if you're not used to them, or if you don't follow directions, and if you overconsume. I will tell you, even I've had bad edible experiences. I was walking my dog one time, just walking my dog, had popped an edible, and all of a sudden my body started stretching. It was like psilocybin nightmare. It was not even like marijuana, but I had a bad experience. I've had bad experiences. What we always advise, just for kicks, if you ever have an edible that gets a little intense, the one thing to do to bring it back down, CBD oil. CBD oil is really effective in working on other transmitters in the endocannabinoid system to sort of counteract the THC. So that's one thing that even I have CBD tincture in my house just in case edibles don't go the way they should. But they want to avoid that in the adult use market. So on the medical side, I can go in and buy a 1,000 milligram edible. But on the adult use side, I'd have to buy 10 100 milligram packages of that same 1,000 milligram package on the medical side. So there is that limit. What's fascinating about 207 is we were definitely by far a state that, given legalization to adult use, our transition happened so quickly. We dominated any other state in our transition. We legalized in November of 2020. Right after Martin Luther King Day in January of 2021, I believe it was, I even read, on January 19th, they opened up licensing for what they called dual licenses, meaning all the medical marijuana dispensaries would be dual licensed to also have an adult use establishment. Interestingly enough, in the marijuana world, we call patient centers dispensaries, but where you buy adult use, they're called establishments. So that's just how it is. And so what we did then, January 19th, they opened up for adult use licenses. There were, by the end of that week, just 4 days later, there were 86 licenses already issued and sales were already starting. We had the fastest transition from medical to adult use. Now, people who knocked the initiative had a valid concern about the business model. The business model was set, for full transparency, who funded this initiative? The big dispensaries, Harvest, Pure Leaf, and MedMen. And as all of you know, because I know you've been in politics, it's virtually impossible for grassroots to get any initiative, to get the amount of signatures. You have to have a petition partners. You have to have someone paying petition gatherers. And so we needed money. to get legalization to happen. As I said, the legislature is never going to legalize in this state. And if they do, it'll be some woefully horrible model with no grow rights and one joint per person is all you're allowed. But with respect to that, that enabled us to make that fast transition. But it also did create, you'll hear people say monopoly. We don't have a monopoly in Arizona. There is not one company owning all dispensaries. But we do have an oligopoly where there is some big money in marijuana. And I don't see how marijuana avoids that. I think it's naive to think that somehow the industry space of marijuana would be idealistic and altruistic when it's all based, anyone in business is there to make money. And so with that comes what happens in businesses. And marijuana business is not unique, it's a business. And so while people were opposed to that business model, we're not into reforming markets or capitalism, we're into reforming marijuana law. So from our perspective, we said, we're not concerned about a business model. We are concerned about legalization and how that benefits consumers. But we do see now that prices are high in the market right now, and that's something that we want to look at and work on, and I'm going to get to that in a second as well. So, with all of that, that's kind of where we are right now in Arizona, where we have a patient program called the Medical Marijuana Act, and we also have adult use. And they are operating side by side. In fact, if you go to a dispensary in Tucson, I believe Green Valley has a Hannah Meds in Green Valley. You'll see that it's separated. One side goes medical, one side goes adult use. And the only real difference in product is one product's more expensive than the other. And that's it. So, we do have a legislative agenda with Arizona NORML. In fact, I'm the registered lobbyist for both Arizona NORML and Southern Arizona NORML. And I just wanted to end with our legislative agenda as we go into this upcoming session. But one thing I do want to say is I want to dispel the myth in the legislature that, if it's a comma D, it's somebody that's pro-marijuana. If it's comma R, it's someone that's not pro-marijuana. It's not necessarily true. It's really funny. Marijuana is really bipartisan in people who support, bipartisan people who aren't for marijuana. In fact, NORML, we're an incredibly nonpartisan organization because we function in a space that requires all parties and all ideologies to work together. In fact, we have a mix on our board in Arizona NORML. We have some Democrats and some Republicans. But we don't talk about politics except for the politics of marijuana. So that's kind of interesting that we really do. We're very cognizant of keeping red or blue out of marijuana. But our legislative agenda is pretty strong this year going into the session. We've already been meeting with people. We have some potential sponsors lined up. Firstly is universal and automatic expungements. I mentioned that earlier. That's something we'd like to see done this year. Next, we want to reduce card costs, but here's the problem. Or do carve-outs for senior citizens, 65 plus, free card. Veterans, free card. But the Medical Marijuana Fund has been raided, and that might not be possible. There was a bill that passed late last year that had incredible bipartisan support that raided the fund. We stood strong against it and said, absolutely not, we're not setting precedent by raiding the Medical Marijuana Fund. But they did raid it for $14.6 million to things unrelated to marijuana. Set a bad precedent, but legislators will do that if there's money and they can get their hands on money. Their principles sometimes get a little compromised with respect to that money. But we also had 207 did a one-time pull of funds out of the Medical Marijuana Act as well. We have some concerns about how depleted the Medical Marijuana Fund has become because one of our legislative victories last year was a bill sponsored by Representative Payne, who is a Republican, but it was HB 2298, which was Arizona. It's phenomenal that we passed this bill. $5 million in research for 5 years, $25 million in research over 5 years to study marijuana and its interaction with prescription drugs, to study marijuana and epilepsy, to study marijuana and autism, and to study marijuana and PTSD. That's phenomenal. There's a woman who does a lot of research who was drummed out of U of A by the name of Dr. Sue Sicily. She has said that this puts Arizona on a global map with respect to research. But it's looking like it could potentially be an unfunded mandate, like a lot of other things in Arizona, because of the raiding of the fund, We're investigating that right now, and we have Representative Payne working on that as well to see where is the fund right now, and will it have enough funds to fund the research bill that we were so proud to see to the finish line just this last year. So we want to reduce card costs, but again, that's a concern with the fact of the medical marijuana fund being rated. Another thing we want to do, and this is not a goal that we're going to accomplish this year, it is to rein in the Department of Child Services. We had a woman on our board for about a year. She was our director of politics. Her name was Julie Gunnigal. She's big in Democratic politics. She, in fact, ran for Maricopa County Attorney just this last cycle and almost won. And she got onto our board as director of politics. Well, she has a case in Arizona where a woman was given doctor's permission to consume marijuana because she had gastroparesis, which is apparently horrific, and the marijuana controlled her nausea and helped her through the pregnancy. Well, when the baby was born, it had some jitters unrelated to marijuana, so what did they do? They tested it. It came back with inactive metabolites. DCS got involved. This is a woman who worked for DCS. She was put on the 25-year registry, meaning she can never work with kids for 25 years. That was her livelihood. And it's incredibly horrible what happens to people when they get put on this registry. So one of the things we want to do is try to rein in DCS, and we have bipartisan support on that. I had a case out of Tucson that I had to refer to Phoenix. Very similar situation. A woman who was pregnant, she consumed marijuana. Get this though, her case, she won in court, but still got placed on the registry because DCS doesn't have to abide by a court ruling. So we want to rein that in. So, and there's no proven science that demonstrates the use of marijuana has a deleterious effect on someone who's pregnant. So research isn't there yet. But we will certainly, there's been bills where we put warning signs up, pregnant, pregnant. And I'm just saying that's just where we are right now. So we want to rein in DCS. And lastly, we've been trying for 3 years to get autism spectrum disorder added to the list of qualifying conditions. There is a group in Phoenix called MAMA, and they're referred to as Mothers Advocating for Medical Marijuana for Autism. We have worked closely with them in the past. In fact, a member on our state board, A.J. Jacobs, is a father of 2 special needs kids with autism. And now we're kind of talking, maybe he's going to have to form the papas, so we'll have the mamas and the papas. But that was a very minor joke. But the thing is that AJ is going to work, instead of us leading on autism this year, we're going to let AJ and mamas lead with that, and we're going to play a supporting role. We have incredible support to add autism, but get this, last year we couldn't get an autism bill, and the bill is so simple. It simply adds autism spectrum disorder use to the list of qualifying conditions. There are so many parents who have anecdotal stories of how people, their kids who have severe autism, how cannabinoids and how marijuana can truly help to improve their lives. And all the parents are asking is, there's not enough research yet. There is research, but they just want the chance to have that freedom to try with their kids. And if it doesn't work, they'll move on to something else. But what we hear anecdotally is there is no medicine or no cure, or there's no cure, and there's no real legit treatment for specific autism symptoms. And so marijuana could serve that purpose. But the problem is, this comes back to dogma versus compassion. We couldn't even get the bill into the Health and Human Services Committee to be heard in committee because Joanne Osborne out of Goodyear was told by Rusty Bowers, the Speaker of the House, don't put that bill in committee. So that's where prohibitionist mindset, we run into a wall in the legislature when we can't even get a bill into committee to be heard. And that bill is strictly a bill of compassion to help parents, and furthermore to help adults who have autism, to help them if they could find relief through the use of marijuana. So that's where we see that utter lack of compassion, to where the prohibitionist mindset overrides any and all common sense to help people. And so with that, that will be our tangentially related fourth goal, to work with autism. Couple things into the future, and I'll end with that, and I hope you have questions. I'll end with that. We want to expand the market to reduce costs and enhance the quality of the product that is now on the market. Prop 207 has a carve-out with respect to furthering the Voter Intention Act that says we can enhance the market by adding 10% licenses, but only if they're social equity. Well, that's a good thing. So we're going to look at how can we then go about potentially adding some more licenses to the mix so that we can create a little more competition in Arizona's market to benefit the consumer. So that's one of our long-term goals. Second goal that I just want to touch briefly on, I sat in with Colorado Normal, almost all their lobby day meetings just this last session, because the idea that is now reared its hideous, ugly head in 4 states thus far, and conversation has become national, is something called a THC cap, meaning the prohibitionists have admitted they can't beat legalization. So what they want to try to do now is to regulate a controlled market by capping, literally capping, THC. The discussion in Colorado was a 15% cap on all marijuana products, medical and adult use. Now that's insane. You'll kill the entire controlled market if you cap THC. But that's a conversation that's really happening. In fact, 2 years ago in our state, Rusty Bowers, our Speaker of the House, floated an HCR, a House concurrent resolution, which just requires an up and down vote of 50 in the House, 50% in the House, 50% in the Senate, to put the bill onto the next major ballot as a referendum. Bowers floated, get this, floated a 2% THC cap for the medical marijuana program. 2% THC. We jokingly called it the hot hemp program because hemp has to be 0.3% THC. So hemp comes in at like 2-3%. It's called hot hemp. It's 2%. When asked where did he pull it from, literally he pulled it from his posterior end. He just made the number up. This is the same individual who in a committee said, yeah, I went to school with people who smoked pot in the 60s and 70s. You know where they all are now? They're dead! I say they're dead! So he also in committee, he'll go into the bludgeoning and the axes and the blood is flowing. In fact, I think he believes that Lizzie Borden smoked a bong before she took an axe and gave her mother 40 whacks. But I suspect that. But so we have it here. We've already had THC caps rear their ugly head. We beat that back. In fact, along with that, as concomitant to the THC cap, Rusty Bowers also wanted $2 million to only research 2 topics: marijuana and its correlation to violent behavior, and marijuana and its correlation to schizophrenia. He didn't want to research anything good about marijuana. He just wanted to dig deep to find something that he could use to sort of advance his prohibitionist agenda. So those are some of the things we do tend to have to fight and fight back on because there is still a prohibitionist mindset in our legislature. And remember, our legislature, as all of you know, does not have a mandate to be like that. It's 16 to 14 in the Senate and 31 to 29 in the House. So it's not a massive mandate to slam all the anti-marijuana stuff down our throats, but they act as if it is. And interestingly enough, we've even had a Democrat out of Tucson who wanted to rein in marijuana. His philosophy is we're just not ready for marijuana. It's a 60-40 vote that clearly said we're ready. It's Representative Freeze. But all I will say is Representative Freeze, they're in 207. 207 says you can't smoke marijuana wherever you can't smoke relative to the Smoke-Free Act. But that doesn't say anything about consuming marijuana products in open spaces or public spaces, the way it's defined smoking. So in 207, you can go to a public park and get this. If you want to walk your dog and consume an edible, that's legal. If you wanted to maybe vape in your passenger seat or the backseat of your car discreetly, that's still kind of legal. But Representative Freeze wanted to rein in not only smoking of marijuana in public and open spaces, he wanted to rein in the use of any and all marijuana products in open and public spaces. We, of course, fought that as well. The idea that we legalize something and say you can't even walk in a public park and consume an edible is a bit far-fetched for me to handle. So we, of course, fought that as well. So we see good and bad. In fact, we had another, speaking of not furthering the act, one last bill I'll talk about by our friend Representative Kavanaugh out of the Phoenix area. He tried to pass a per se DUI limit just this last session, even though Prop 207 says there will be no per se DUI limits in Arizona until NHTSA, the National Institute of Highway Traffic Safety, until they can determine scientifically that a limit does exist. What that means by a per se limit, it means that they'll cap an impairment limit at a certain nanogram per milliliter. Representative Kavanaugh proposed 2 nanograms per milliliter, which means I'm DUI when I drive home tonight, and I haven't consumed since last night. But I'm total DUI in his world. And all of us, if you're a regular daily consumer, you're over 2 nanograms per milliliter. I am not impaired right now. You might think I'm impaired, but I'm truly not impaired right now. But you can't do it. It violates furtherance of the act, and he finally pulled that bill. But we expect to see, as much as we're playing offense with a proactive agenda, we also expect to be playing defense as well in the upcoming session. And with that, that is what's going on in Arizona with marijuana, what's happened historically, where we are right now. I'll open it up. Please pepper me with questions. Yes, man. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. I appreciate you all so very kind. No. Well, I shouldn't say no. You are correct. Every state that has done any form of legalization is in contradiction to federal prohibition. What happened in the past, though, is, and this is what got me involved, there was something called the Cohen-Ogden memos that existed that were for the Department of Justice that basically said, even though marijuana is illegal federally, the Justice Department can use no funds to go after or attack state-regulated markets. Well, what happened when President Trump got elected, he appointed, you might recall, Jeff Sessions, who was a prohibitionist attorney general. Well, in January 2018, Jeff Sessions repealed both the Cohen-Ogden memos, basically saying it's okay for the Department of Justice to go after states. I was waiting for that to happen. I knew that was going to happen, but it took a year for that to happen. But when he did it made me so angry, that's when I called National Normal and said, how do I engage Tom O'Halloran about marijuana? I need to make this, something's got to change. And that got me, he directed me. Interestingly enough, when I called National Normal, strangely enough, the person that answered the phone was Keith Stropp, the person who founded Normal in 1970. When I called, and I was like, what, they got you in like a broom closet on a landline? Is that what you've been relegated to? But he referred me to Arizona Normal and an old director who has since passed by the name of Michael Weiser. If you run in the Democratic political circles, you probably know Michael Weiser because I believe he was one of the heads of the Progressive Caucus at one point. And so lots of Dems knew Michael Weiser. He kind of was my mentor. Like, I went to my first meeting in Phoenix in February 2018, and I identified Michael as someone, that's the person I need to know if I want to be involved in advocacy. And he and I became really close, but he has since, unfortunately, and we truly believe he died for the cause. He passed away of a sudden heart attack at 61. But he was an incredible marijuana warrior, and rest in power to Michael Weiser. But he got me involved, and I've been and while he was still director of Arizona Normal, we had an old Tucson chapter fold, and then I created Southern Arizona Normal with he and I, the goal of really developing 2 big chapters in Arizona. But the problem is, with respect to the federal legalization, there are bills that have been pushed. One that you probably have heard of is the MORE Act, which is the Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment and Expungement Act, which would do what is called deschedule marijuana. Now, there's 2 ideas that can happen at the Fed level. As all of you probably know, marijuana right now is on the Controlled Substance Act as a Schedule I drug, right up there with no medical purpose whatsoever, with heroin, all these other worse drugs. So the problem becomes, some people talk about, in fact, Joe Biden will talk about this, decriminalize or reschedule. Well, reschedule means move it down the Controlled Substance Act. That's horrific. We don't want anything to do with that, because that throws a wrench into every state's medical marijuana program. Because then we get into doctors prescribing, prescriptions, all that kind of stuff that we don't want to get anywhere near. We want to deschedule. So if you hear the word reschedule, run from it. Run deep into the night from rescheduling. But descheduling is what we want, because descheduling removes marijuana from this Controlled Substance Act and puts it in the same category as alcohol and tobacco. That's what we want. What that does, it doesn't then make marijuana legal. It just then allows every state to do whatever they want. So you won't see, like, if a MORE Act were to pass and we descheduled marijuana at the federal level, Idaho wouldn't suddenly be legal. It would be up to Idaho to do that. But there'd be no federal interference with legality. So that's what descheduling does. We're not there yet. In fact, one thing like is the Gateway Legislative Act to more marijuana action at the federal level is what's called the Safe Banking Act. And that, right now, all marijuana businesses kind of don't have banking as an option. So that's why when I go as a customer, or when you go as an adult use consumer or a patient, that's why you have to pay with cash, because there's just not banking set up because of the duality of federal prohibition with states' liberalized laws. So the Safe Banking Act has passed Judiciary Committee 5 times, but still has not passed Congress. We're still working on the MORE Act. We have a really incredibly strong lobbyist at National for NORML who is working on the MORE Act. Interesting enough, just last week or 2 weeks ago, the first Republican-sponsored legalization bill was introduced into Congress by a South Carolina Republican, and she was immediately basically almost censured by the South Carolina Republican Party because how dare we don't support this. But there's movement, but it's going to still take some time. And that's where we need to get to really free everything up, particularly also concepts of interstate commerce, where marijuana can then cross state lines legally and all of that kind of stuff. Through descheduling, that can happen. But we're just not there yet.
Is that South Carolina Act still on the books?
It's still in Congress as a bill. I don't know where it is right now, but it just was introduced like 2 weeks ago.
So you're most likely not going to get arrested if you come through the checkpoint and stop for...
No one, you know, it's funny. We still, even ourselves, we did a clinic, an expungement clinic in Yuma, and they gave us some gifts. The dispenser gave us some gifts for, you know, working with them, and we were like, oh, we got to go through that checkpoint with these gifts. I mean, obviously the gifts were marijuana, but good thing for us, that checkpoint was closed because it was our understanding because of people refusing vaccines. So kind of helped us to get through with the checkpoint being closed. I don't have a definitive answer on that. I know that if you lay low and you're decent, it really kind of depends on the agent. But I think the worst thing that could happen is you could get it confiscated. I know I'm prepared with the medical argument. I'm a patient. How do you expect me to travel from point A to point B with medicine? You know, so we always say lay low and just... The
old white guy, just come on through.
I hate to say that. That does indeed happen too. It does. And as bad as that is, that's true.
Colorado was working on a vaporizer test for the law enforcement. Did that ever go anywhere, or is that still
floating around?
Yeah, is it even probable or possible?
I don't know. I mean, like I said, we don't support impaired driving, but we support a fair application to consumers. But all those things are still iffy about how... The problem, too, is, as an experienced consumer, I can have certainly a much higher level of metabolites in my system and still not be impaired the way someone who just consumed for the first time might be impaired. Marijuana is weird like that. And it's not like alcohol, where there's a direct linear relationship between consumption and impairment. And so it's a tricky, sticky issue with respect to consumption, DUIs, and impairment behind the wheel, or impairment anywhere. So we don't have it scientifically solved yet. So it will continue to be a problem, which is why we're grateful for the carve-outs, at least, that simple inactive metabolites can't get you a DUI.
We're going to ask our Zoom community if they have any questions to raise their hand, and I will call on you, and you can then turn on your mic and turn on your video. We would like to have you ask any questions you'd like to Mike. And then we'll go back to the audience for now. Anybody else have any questions?
I have a quick one. The Reefer Madness movie that we might have seen a long time ago.
Which was originally called Tell Your Children, which was the book that Alex Berenson wrote, Tell Your Children,
so
which was
a
debunk prohibition.
A quick review on that, like a 1-minute review
on the Reefer Madness?
Yeah, the Reefer Madness.
Well, have any of you seen the movie? It was from the late 30s. It was called Reefer Madness. It's basically these people, they're out partying, and then they get behind, they run over people. They have no clue what they're dancing. They're they're having fun, which is bad. But Reefer Madness exists still. and it exists hardcore in the prohibitionist mindset, and it's not going away, because I think if you're this committed to prohibition at this point in time where we are, you're taking that position to your grave. You're not going to change.
Yeah.
So reefer madness really does still exist, and there are some strong reefer madness types in our state legislature who are really...
It would cause you to kill people and...
Oh, yeah, well, the whole Rusty Bowers wanting to link it to violent behavior. In fact, he wanted to go further than just studies. He wanted to get into a bill the concept that if anyone's ever arrested for a violent crime, they need to be tested for marijuana. The whole Rittenhouse thing.
Oh, God.
Kevin Sabat, with Smarter Approaches to Marijuana, made a comment on Twitter about, was Rittenhouse a pothead? To where even National Normal said, really, Kevin, you're going to stoop that low? Because it's real easy for them to discover. They really think there's a link, and they truly believe, because they read like Alex Berenson's book, Tell Your Children, about the high potency THC, that new dilemma that the prohibitionists are really fun, that they're really fond of pushing with high potency THC, and why we need THC caps, because they truly believe that high potency THC is driving people insane. For full disclosure too, I don't use high potency THC other than I consume edibles, but I don't consume dab, shatter, or any of that stuff but that's my personal preference. I'm old school, I prefer flower.
Can you refer us to a website or maybe your own website if we have further questions down the road or would like to learn more?
ArizonaNormal.org or SOAZNormal.org. And if you're interested in our expungement clinics, we have a full schedule and information on expungements at ArizonaNormal.org/expungement. Yes, ma'am.
Can you use marijuana to relax?
I can. Here's the thing, and I'll speak personally to that. While my chronic pain condition, and I believe everyone over the age of 50 should get, in one hand, they should get issued an AARP card and also a medical marijuana card. Because let's be honest, once you get past 50, you got aches and pains. You know what I'm saying? I got aches and pains that I didn't have when I was 30 and 40. They popped up out, you know what I mean? All of you can identify, you know what I mean? We all have aches and pains. So my chronic condition is back pain, because I was in a car accident about 20 years ago. I never fully get, my back bothers me. But I legitimately use, and for full disclosure, I drank heavily for 28 years, and I smoked cigarettes heavily for a long time as well. And the only thing I consume now is marijuana. In fact, marijuana helped to wean me off of alcohol. But I have an issue with obsessive thoughts, and I'm my worst enemy in the evening, and my thoughts can turn against me. And so to cure obsessive thinking and to give myself a rest from myself in the evening, I rely heavily on what are, for lack of a better term, what are called indica strains. And those are strains that you'll hear most rudimentarily referred to as the couch lock strains, which basically really relax and mellow you, and you literally kind of feel like you're melted into a couch and just want to eat and not want to move. I mean, it sounds silly, but that's versus what, like the other side of the spectrum of strains are called sativa strains. And I can't touch them. They make me anxious, my heart races, I feel tightness in the chest. I can't, I have to look at genetics of strains to tell which are good for me. But I do use them to literally relax and calm my mind for that 2-hour period in the evening where I don't have to beat myself up anymore. I can just relax without those thoughts constantly. There are strains that do a real good job of just quelling that obsessive thinking. So does it help me to literally relax? Absolutely. I'm sorry. Look, let me go here and then we'll go back to... Go ahead.
Hang on a second, Bill. One more question live and then we'll come to you.
All right. I come from Sierra Vista, and I've heard through the grapevine that it's dry there.
Dry is in the old word we used to say about
I don't know, but
Dry counties?
You cannot get it there at all. And I was wondering if you've heard anything that is up and coming for that?
The problem, Sierra Vista with Cochise County, is they there was a dispensary in Sierra Vista. It got moved, I believe it moved to Benson maybe, and then that one moved, which is the new Prime Leaf in
Well,
Tucson.
they're everywhere around us.
They are.
But we're sitting there drier than,
It's my understanding that
Frustrating.
dispensary in Bisbee is, as the crow flies, less than 25 miles. So
yeah, I understand it, but I want to know why. I've heard through the grapevine that it's because they don't want the crazies to come on the road, you know, that are smoking marijuana and et cetera. And I was wondering if you had heard anything. Why don't they have any dispensaries
Well,
there?
two reasons. One, if there was a dispensary, they could move it out, and but there then was a rural backfill of dispensaries because you're supposed to have 2 in each county.
Well,
So there's one in Bisbee. I think there's a backfill, and I'd have to confirm that with our
Benson and
attorney.
Douglas and all those have it, but
Right,
Cochise
I
County.
don't want to have to travel so far.
Cochise County. That's the problem, because your only option is really Tucson or Bisbee.
Bisbee, yeah.
Bisbee
But
or
I want to know
Tucson.
why isn't there marijuana?
It could be
elsewhere?
also, can't answer it specifically, but I will say this. Many towns have the option in 207, even if a town has, let's say, for example, I think Green Valley did this, but they allowed, for example, Hannah Meds to go dual license, but they can prohibit any other new marijuana business from coming into the city.
I think that's what.
And that might be, that Peoria did that, or not Peoria, Gilbert did it, Oro Valley did it, Marana did it. There are towns that are actually, and this happens in every state that legalizes, unless they have a clause in the initiative that says that towns can't prohibit. So right now, towns can prohibit further growth of marijuana businesses.
Do you think it has anything to do with the Army base there?
Could be too. I know Sierra Vista is pretty conservative.
Oh, it's more than conservative.
So that could play in too. But before I leave, I want to get your name and number, and I can get more information on that.
Okay.
Just
Okay,
before
Bill.
I leave, remind me. though.
I have a comment on reefer madness that accentuates the whole idea of reefer madness. It happened to me when I was in Vietnam. We happened to have marijuana on 3 of the 6 sitting in the sandbags on 3 of the 6 guard towers that we were at. I was up there with myself and the commander of relief who was going around and the guy that was taking over for me. And we were in a high level guard tower with about a 4-foot floor. And we had 3 shots rung out, and they were close enough so we could hear them go through the air past us. And all of a sudden, there were these 3 adult males on the floor of this little guard tower looking at each other. And all of a sudden, we only looked at each other for just a short period. We all broke out in hysteria, laughing our full heads off. But that's the reefer madness that I.
That's a good story.
Thank you. Great story.
Thank you for the presentation. Been very informative.
Oh, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
All right. Anybody else have any questions online?
She's got one back here.
If not, let's go to the audience.
Go ahead.
I guess I'm kind of confused, the difference between CBD oil and marijuana, because we have a CBD store next to the Democratic office.
There's one right here. I saw that.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, and, but I don't think they're a dispensary for marijuana.
They're not.
They're not.
They're not. So
CBD
how is
is,
CBD oil used compared to marijuana?
it's a great question. CBD is a non-psychoactive cannabinoid. It's literally cannabidiol or something like that. But what it does not have is its bastard brother or sister THC, which is the psychoactive cannabinoid, particularly THC delta 9, because I'm sure you guys have heard of THC delta 8 now, which is, weirdly enough, a trace occurrence cannabinoid in marijuana, but can be extracted from hemp. And so THC delta 8 is extracted from hemp, putting it in a gray area. So it's still, we don't know where it belongs because it's an extract from hemp. But CBD is clearly so you can consume CBD all day. You could smoke like a hemp flower, and you would feel maybe a little relaxed, but you're not going to have a psychoactive feeling that THC would bring, or THC along with all the other cannabinoids and terpenes. So CBD can be used for a lot of things, though. It can be used for anxiety. Sometimes when I wake up, if I'm feeling really anxious, and I would advise with CBD, this is my personal opinion, to use oil and do it sublingually. I don't think that vaping CBD or like any of that is real effective. I think the most effective means of CBD is use oil or a tincture sublingually. But it really can help with anxiety. It can help with some pain management. It can help with relaxation, stress relief. That's the purpose that I see in CBD. I will also say that even though there's no studies, unfortunately, I give my dog CBD because nothing helps him with thunderstorms. Thundershirt, everything that I've tried, CBD is the only thing that calms my big German Shepherd in a thunderstorm. Furthermore, it helps him with pain management for older joints and that kind of stuff. He's been on CBD for almost 3 years now.
Well, that's funny you said that because I worked at the Animal League and we had a cat there who was there for 10 years from a kitten, and he sprayed all the time, and they tried everything. And they put him on, I'm trying to think of the antidepressant that caused people to get mad or angry or whatever it was. And that didn't help. So they gave him CBD oil, and now he is adopted.
Calmed him down.
And, you know,
Calmed him.
10 years.
I don't want to be one of those people that stands up here and says, it's a miracle! Nothing's a miracle. But I do truly believe there are real therapeutic and wellness benefits from both CBD and its cousin, marijuana. In fact, I jokingly, as I said earlier, we view CBD as the gateway drug. People do CBD and then go, let me try marijuana. But what's interesting in statistics is the largest growing group of marijuana consumers are the elderly. And it's counterintuitive because you would think, well, those are just kind of like boomers who, smoked pot in their younger years and then had families and got away from it and are coming back to it for pain relief and everything else that ails us as older people now. But it's not the case. It's people who never experimented, never used it, who are now trying it for the first time.
And usually for pain, you're saying.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think it does work. I mean, but I also think that's why I fully support adult use. I don't think it's fair to say to people who are 21 and older that you can't derive medical benefit from marijuana because our program only defines the medical benefits to be this. We all can derive. No, that's not saying it works for everyone. That's the other weird thing about marijuana. There's no prescribed dose. There's no what works for you works for you. What works for me won't work for him. That's why, while you want to apply science to it, it's really a very individual thing in how we react and how we respond. I mean, some people can smoke marijuana once. I'm sure you know somebody. I got paranoid and I'm never touching that stuff again. I humbly believe it could be that they have a highly functioning endocannabinoid system that then got overwhelmed when they consumed more phytocannabinoids and just went, whoa! Where people who have dysfunctional endocannabinoid systems, which they do link to illness, benefit that.
So CBD oil, do you need a prescription for that?
No, absolutely. You can buy it right there at the My CBD store.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And
And there's
that
all...
is out there
They sell it
advertising.
at Fry's.
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I would say also be careful where you get it. For example, I only buy CBD from a company out of Colorado called Bluebird. They have all tested products, and that's what I use for myself and my dog. I wouldn't buy CBD from Circle K or, I'd just be selective and feel like I have bought CBD from My CBD store. I live in Catalina. And there's one in our neighborhood, and I have bought once, and it was decent. It wasn't bad.
I remember what the cat was on. He was on Prozac.
Oh, my.
And it didn't work for 10 years. Yeah.
That's like with school-age kids. We like say nope to dope and ugh to drugs, but here's a pill on everyone's tongue just to get you to focus in
I know,
school.
it never worked.
No. But yeah, I would I'll give you, my mother is 81. My mother grew up in reefer madness, and it probably breaks her heart that her son has been a lifelong marijuana consumer. But she's accepted that in me, and I've gotten her to the point where she uses a THC CBD topical on her knees that brings her pain relief for arthritis. And that's an 81-year-old woman who was not pro-marijuana at all. And I tell her, tell all your friends.
Oh, no,
I
she's using gateway drugs.
Right, that's it. You know, she rubs it on her knee, next she'll be rubbing it on her head, and then she'll be smoking it. But I always tell her, tell people, because that's how we dispel the madness. And that's how, like, there's nothing wrong or illegitimate or horrible or immoral about an 80-year-old woman saying, I got some arthritic knees, I'm going to rub some THC CBD, because I will say this, in topicals, the combination of THC and CBD is incredibly effective. Like, I use a topical on my back for that. And you can't get high, and theoretically you can't even fail a drug test with topicals. But I encourage CBD too, to try it. And because if you try it and it doesn't work for you, well, then it didn't work.
It didn't work.
And
Sure.
But if you try and you get a benefit, big thumbs up. Because it's less toxic than big pharma.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, in all honesty, so. There are benefits. And I'm not out here being a proponent that teenagers but responsible consumption should be allowed. And it is allowed, so.
We'll talk to Laura for you.
There you go. You had one other, I think.
We got one back out there?
Go ahead.
I was just going to mention and add on to some of the conversation about CBD. You have to be kind of careful what drugs you're on. And
Interactions, I do agree with that, with
CBD,
interactions.
so you got to do your homework.
I agree. I don't say, like I said too, definitely be informed as a consumer.
Yeah,
I do agree with that. You never know.
yeah. You can't just take it and go and
And don't go overboard. I would follow recommendations for dosing, but it has value. I mean, there is.
Oh, yeah, I like CBD.
See, it's.
I like it all, actually.
Annika, you got a question?
I don't like about it.
I make my own topical.
Oh, good for you. And I make my own edibles.
Yeah,
Oh,
it really works, too.
Yeah, that's.
how do you extract it? How do you distill it?
Well, about the.
Well, exactly. Any other questions?
If not,
Oh,
Becky?
I have a little funny. When we were living in southern Colorado, high in the mountains.
you're right.
Rocky Mountain High.
Nice.
Yeah.
In the early 2000s,
Is that your-
they were growing lots and lots of it up in the hidden parts of the mountain. And so they caught the guys that were doing it. So one day they decided that they were going to burn all of it off. The sheriff's department went up, they were going to burn it off. And there was something going on at the Civic Center. And a bunch of, I don't know what it was, whether it was a big garage sale or what, but there were a lot of people there, and all of a sudden you could just smell this coming in the windows. And people were kind of looking around, and I looked at these young guys that were probably 20 years old, and they went, and we were all just, we knew what it was. It was kind of filtering through the windows, and everybody was starting to feel a little good. Buying a little more, from the ladies selling the windows. And so I said, oh, it's marijuana. And this one little old woman said, oh, but it's illegal.
Be able to laugh and have a little bit of fun with marijuana, I mean, and like I said, there's nothing wrong with consuming for the joy of just consuming. As long as you're responsible about that, there should be nothing wrong at all, no moral judgment, nothing.
Let's give Mike a big hand.
Oh, well, thank you so much to all of you. Thank you for your attentiveness. Thank you for listening. Appreciate everything.